Okay. Uh,
Test, test.
Thank you. All right. Hello. My name's Aidan. I'm going to give you a quick talk about some of the things I've learned making guards, and hopefully it's useful for other developers. Next slide, please. So I know what you're thinking. It's like unfair advantage. Maybe he's talking about using AI, but I asked ChatGPT to come up with some talk suggestions, and they sucked. So I'm not too worried about that. Next slide, please. So I always think it's important to talk about who this information is for, because it's not always like super relevant for everyone. Next slide, please. So this is done under the context of people who want to make a sustainable indie studio, and that talks about like making money and making decisions that will make your game profitable. And hopefully it's something that AAA developers can learn a little bit from as well, because the cost of development is getting really high. It's getting really, really high, and I think we're starting to see that nowadays with a lot of like the layoffs, and the risk is getting higher because the cost is increasing, which has impacts on how creative you can be and the risks that you can take. And it takes a long time to validate whether AAA games are going to be a success on the market, which is another one of the problems that we're seeing. Next slide, please. So a little bit about me. Next. My name's Aidan. I quit my job in April of this year to start my own studio. Next slide, please. I've been in games for around 17 years, primarily in AAA, and I've worked in the UK, China, and Canada. And the reason why I think that's important is because there's actually like a pretty different culture of development. You'd think that the UK and Canada would be very similar, but there's actually a lot of differences, and in particular, I think working in China informed a lot of my process around shipping games. And I also have a little bit of a background as a producer. It's like my dark secret, which is another reason why I'm sort of informed the way I think about shipping games. And here's some of the stuff I've worked on in the past. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of you had the chance to play our game earlier. It's called Guards. Essentially, it's like a medieval Judge Dredd. You're kicking down doors and busting fantasy perks. Next slide, please. It's a combination of Vermintide, Angerfoot. If any of you are familiar with Terry Pratchett, the sort of humour and goofiness of the City Watch stuff. So that's something that we wanted to kind of capture. So it's like a little bit grimdark, but also a bit funny when you're kicking your friend through a window or what have you. Next slide, please. So the first tip that I want to talk about is the use of asset packs. Asset packs tend to get a bit of a bad rep in the industry. When you talk about asset packs, people are like, oh no, you shouldn't do that. But I want to talk a bit about how positive they are. Next slide, please. The player doesn't care. Like, they just don't care. They can't tell the difference, and even if they could, I don't think they mind too much, because the speed at which people play games, they don't tend to look at every rock in the scene. They just see it and move on, see it and move on. Next slide, please. So, two of these rocks are from really expensive AAA games, and one of these rocks is a $9.99 asset store pack, and maybe some people here can tell the difference if there's artists in the crowd, but I guarantee that if you put this in front of the average player, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference, right? And then, you know, a little personal story. One of my close friends is an environment artist, and all he does all day long is make rocks. And I'm telling him he probably needs to diversify a little bit. Yeah, you don't need to make rocks, expensive rocks anymore. Next slide, please. So if you do some quick napkin maths, the median revenue for a game on Steam is a little over $1,100. And so only 32% of games actually make more than that. And so if you think about the cost to hire even a junior artist in a place like Vancouver, it works out about 4 days of art time. So you can be quite smart about what you buy asset packs for. You don't need crates or rocks or like lampposts. So you can be a bit selective about what you use asset packs for and save that budget for the stuff that really matters, like characters and big points of interest. And when you buy asset packs, they're normally on sale or there's some promotion to get them for free. So just start building your asset library now. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there's asset packs for everything, not just art. You don't need to make a settings menu. They sell those already. You can retexture them to make them look better. This is Hydroneer in the top. They use the Cinti asset packs, but they did a great job of just making it look unique. You can also use post-processing to sort of obfuscate some of the raw assetiness. And you should credit the asset packs that you use. One of the things we do is, in our game, if you click on the link in the credits, it actually takes you to their store page. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the next thing I want to talk about is shipping games quick. The longer you take to make a game, the more of a risk it is, and the more money you have to make to recoup your cost, or even if you think of it in terms of salary. Next slide, please. So in AAA, it's not uncommon to spend 3 to 5 years working on a title. And often the stuff that's cool or in vogue when you start is not when you ship the game. And the last 12 to 18 months is just polish. But it doesn't really move the needle in terms of how well the game is received critically or how many units it sells. So it's really very expensive, diminishing returns, and it's a lot of polish. And ultimately, boilerplate or genre trope features or visual polish aren't going to fix fundamental issues with the core of your game. And you can see it a lot of times. These games take 5 years and they come out and the response is very sort of mediocre. And if you've ever sort of worked on one of those, it's like, man, we could have shipped that 18 months earlier and achieved more or less the same result. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the really important things that I've learned while I've been working on Gods is this concept of product market fit. And ultimately this is, have you built a thing that people want? And that's what you need to validate as soon as possible. In England we've got a phrase called a chocolate teapot. I don't know if you have that in Canada, but it's like something that's pretty but useless, right? If you had a chocolate teapot, it would just melt. So if you haven't seen it, I really recommend this talk. Why Dark Souls is the IKEA of games, and he goes into market fit a lot, using Dark Souls as a case study of working smart. And really the most important decision you're ever going to make is at the beginning of the project. What is the genre of your game? Because some genres just have small audiences. For instance, if you're working on a point-and-click adventure, the most you can hope to make is $2 to $3 million. So if you're spending $2 million on a point-and-click adventure, it's going to be very, very risky. And typically that goes for a lot of older genres, which is sad, but that's why you don't tend to see them so much anymore, like RTS, point-and-click, fighting games. And the only real way to validate is through selling. There's a lot of vanity metrics that can be a little bit misleading. There's plenty of evidence now of people who've got lots of wish lists on Steam that don't convert into sales. The conversion rate's gone down because of like the Next Fest. And people follow the Can I Pet the Dog Twitter, but they're not buying every dog petting game on there. So get people to show their support with their wallet. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then just some other tips. If you're not embarrassed about what you put out first, you probably waited too long. You need to just release smaller chunks of game. The average playtime that people play a game, even like an amazing game like Deep Rock, people tend to just play it for 2 to 3 hours. You can also validate game ideas through making target footage. You don't need to make the whole game. And I think going back to Dark Souls is a great example of a studio that's picked a lane and just focused on one thing. Because even if your first game flops, you're learning, your knowledge is about the tech, about the genre, about the audience, is all compounding. So don't keep chopping and changing. Like, pick a genre that you love and sort of go all in on that. And just challenge assumptions about everything that you need to make. Like, you don't need a FOV slider, that's not going to sell units. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And then finally, just want to talk about embracing your constraints. Next slide, please. So, as a small developer, you've got a lot of weaknesses. There's lots of people with more time and more money and more people. unpredictable. So you need to turn your weaknesses into strengths, and often they lead to more interesting gameplay and aesthetics. Like Hydroneer, no one likes working on UI, it's a nightmare. So the guy just got rid of it and just had everything in world space. Or Slime Rancher, they didn't want to animate, which is why they've got the simple slimes. Or Stray, the cat game. All of the NPCs are robots, which are obviously very easy to kit bash, and they have a monitor for a face, so that's a smart decision. Next slide, please. Yeah, embrace the jank. I don't know if anyone plays PUBG, but you've got a 50-50 chance of getting through a window. People are more interested in interesting and janky rather than polished and kind of a bit boring. And players are way more forgiving now than they used to be because of YouTube. Yeah, just embrace it. And what devs care about, what players care about is often completely opposite. Next slide, please. Yeah, just identify your constraints up front before you start making the game, and then use that as a pillar for your design. Like, if you haven't got a UI artist, maybe you want to embrace the in-world sort of information presentation. Next slide, please. So the last thing I want to say is, don't compare yourself with games that have got bigger teams and budget and time, because you can't. So focus on working smart and doing stuff that's the best that you can do. And it's not going to be perfect, but that's okay, because even a 6 out of 10 that exists and is profitable is better than that game of the year that only exists in your head. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, and you should check out Only Up, because it's a great case study. They made $1.5 million, and it's largely just Unreal template stuff and store-bought assets. Next slide, please. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. Any questions?
I think it asks how long an indie game development cycle should be, especially for your very first kind of title. Do you have any good, quick estimates of, like, you said, learn the genre, good things. How small a scope do you really want to aim for?
So the question is, how long should you aim for your development cycle? I think, for me, personally, I don't want to ever spend 5 years working on anything again, because if it's 5 years a project, you can only work on about 8 games in your career, and you only really learn through shipping. So for me personally, I wouldn't want to spend more than 18 months on something, but the quicker you can get it out, the better. Like, why not 9 months? Like, why not 6 months? Yeah.
Are your slides available?
Yeah, I can make them available, yeah. Yeah.
So, what are the things that games that spend the most time on, and what are the things that they should spend on?
So the question is, what is some of the stuff people spend the most time on, and what should they spend the time on? I think it's important to be able to identify some conversations drive the quality of the game up, and some don't, ultimately. For instance, we had a conversation about the color of the blood on the enemies, right? Should it be red or should it be green? It doesn't matter. Like, no one's going to buy more copies of the game based on the color of the blood. So I think it's just about identifying what is actually going to move the needle and make you sell more copies of the game. Yeah.
You said like 2 million is not good for a point to play. Do you know that if you're a producer? How would you find out? What are some resources to find out if a certain amount of money is a certain amount of a certain genre is selling?
So the question is, what resources can you use to identify like the total addressable market? There's a plugin for Steam that I use, which is just the estimated net revenue, which takes all of the maths out of the equation. So definitely get that plugin. It's just for Chrome. Then you can use resources like Game Data Crunch, and so you can look for the genre, and it's really good because you can look at the outliers, take all the outliers out. So if you're making a survival game, just take out Subnautica, take out Rust, take out whatever some of the other ones are, and see what the median revenue of all the other ones is, and then look at what's left, and be realistic and be honest about what quality bar you can hit, and then that will give you some data about how much you could theoretically make in that genre. And some genres you just want to steer well clear of, because it's like, yeah, you can't compete in that space. Yeah.
What are the most important things to focus on for marketing on Steam in 2020?
Okay. So the question is, what's the most important stuff to focus on marketing? I'm not a marketing person by trade. Like, I can only talk to some of the stuff I've learned on like how to market a game, channels and things like that. The number one most important thing seems to be the art that you use for your capsule for the thing on Steam. More than 50% of all of your sales will come directly from Steam. The next two highest things are YouTubers and TikTok. And YouTubers and TikTok together is still less than just the organic traffic you get from Steam. So stuff like Twitter, it's just like, don't waste your time. Facebook, don't waste your time, but just focus on making your store page look awesome. And then TikTokable stuff second, and then YouTubers third. All right, that's it for questions. Thank you.